Josh, come on up, man. Welcome.
So, if you guys know Joe Fairless, who wrote the Best Ever, Joe is like, he literally wrote the book on syndications, and he's out of Dallas. They have Ashcroft Capital. Cool cat. I mean, you can check out his podcasts and stuff on YouTube, and the Best Ever podcast. Joe puts together some amazing funds. I mean, they are. I think Ashcroft Capital now has like a couple $1 billion in assets under management. I mean, they're a huge syndicator out of Dallas. So, but I thought it was kind of ironic. I'm going to pick on Wes for just a second. You know, I mean, he's 30 pages into this 300-page book, right? And it changed his life. So after he got through the acknowledgments and he found out who Joe Fairless's grandmother was, it changed his life forever. So that was the best part of the book for him. Right. All right. So, so you guys, some of you guys, I know a lot of you guys in the room already. You kind of know a little bit of my story, but so I'm not gonna get into a lot of it right now. We have about $95 million of assets under management that we acquired last year, in the Dallas market and the Atlanta market. And I've done a lot of deals here locally, like smaller deals, as I was cutting my teeth doing flips and things like that. So I've been investing in real estate for about 15 years, and I've got about close to 30 years in my real estate career, my journey, and everything that I've done, and it's absolutely ridiculous. So take out your phones. Everybody got your phones? You take out your phones. And on your phones, we are starting it's an educational platform. And if you go to FloVestor on Facebook, it's FLOVESTOR, follow us, friend us. I'm doing like daily videos. Wes has been helping me out with this. We're doing some daily videos. They are absolutely horrific. They're terrible right now. The community is small. There's hardly anybody in it. So we thought, well, let's make our mistakes now while nobody's in there. And we've been a little bit goofy in there, but we're kind of dialing this in. We've been doing it for about a month, and we're starting to dial some of this stuff in, and we're in the middle of building a website. So FloVestor.com does not exist yet. We own it, but it doesn't exist yet. It's under construction. But a lot of it right now, if you just follow us on the Facebook page, it helps us boost our street cred, if you will, when somebody comes to look at the page, if there's more people that like the page. Then if you guys are on Facebook or you go to a page and there's nobody on there, it's like, okay, I'm bouncing. I'm out of here, right? So hopefully it's of value, and you stick around, you come back, and you actually consume, what we put out. But if it's not, we just appreciate you being a friend. So thanks for that. But all right, so tonight we're talking about how to increase profits through your real estate portfolio. This is a big deal for me because the way that I started out. But I want to start and frame this with a story. Okay, so it's July 4th of 2021. I'm hanging out with my family and got my grandkids with us. Fireworks are getting ready to get going. We're cooking out with the neighbors, and I get a phone call. And in this phone call, the person on the other end is like completely frantic, just losing their mind. I'm like, calm down, what's going on? A 19-year-old girl has just been shot and killed in our parking lot. What do we do? So what do you do? I mean, seriously, what do you do? Well, they were already there, right? So there wasn't much I could do as the manager of the property, but these are real things that happen in owning multifamily properties, right? So did anybody sign up for that class that said how to handle the shooting of a 19-year-old child on your property? Or did anybody get into multifamily investing and say, I hope somebody dies on my property this week? We don't, right? These are the horror stories that we hear about. But see, the thing that we're going to talk about tonight is not property management. That is property management. We're going to talk about asset management. There's a huge, huge, huge difference. All right. So what's the difference? Wes did a great job of kind of recapping and going through some of the bullets on asset management just a moment ago, right? But see, a lot of times when we start out in multifamily investing or real estate investing, we get into it with this idea that we want passive income, right? Somebody sold us on the deal. I want passive income, and real estate's the way to do it. Until you own the property and you start managing the property. And so the difference between being a property manager and being an asset manager is a difference between working on your business and working in your business. Most people, when they're starting out, don't realize that they're actually starting a business. They just want to own some real estate. Real estate's a cool thing to invest in. It's a hedge against inflation. It's a safe, secure thing over time. It builds wealth. All these things that we hear, but when you get into the nitty gritty of going out and having to do leases, figuring out, I don't even know what Zillow is or how to spell that or where to find that. My kids told me about that. My 2-year-old can probably go find houses on it, but how do I get there and how do I market my properties on there to find buyers? And what's the best platform to find? Do I use Zumper or, some of these other homes.com? Should I list my listings with a real estate broker? I don't know. And we have to figure this stuff out, right? Do I put a sign up in the window that says for rent so that I can tell every Tom, Dick, and Harry down the street that my place is vacant? Please come vandalize me. What's the answer here, right? And property management, you're dealing with all that stuff. You're getting a phone call at 8:00 at night on 4th of July that says somebody just died in your parking lot. What are you going to do about it? See, what I didn't tell you is that for the next week, I was at that property every single day trying to keep the rest of the tenants from bailing on us and walking and not paying the rent. That project, I had to create security for those people, and I had no idea what to do. And it was unbelievable, the process we had to go through. But as a property manager, as an owner of a property, when you're doing it yourself, you're like in there. You're up to your elbows like this, trying to figure out what to do and how to manage all these things. And then you get those calls in the middle of the night that their toilet's clogged or that somebody moves out and you got to figure out, okay, who's going to do the drywall repairs for the hole in the wall because they cut a hole in the wall, they put the poster over it, and that's where they stash their drugs, because that happens too. Or you get the call that somebody just played Wild West and they shot up the buildings because 2 neighbors decided that they wanted to hate on each other with 22s. And they're shooting everything up, and the 3-year-old child and the mom are hiding in the closet. See, that was one of our other buildings that got shot up. And you get these stories, property managers deal with that stuff. But when we're getting into asset management, totally different. A property manager is going to spend somewhere to the tune of 30, 40 hours a week. And one person, if you're on site, you can manage, if you live on site on one property, you could probably manage somewhere between 150, maybe 200 units. You might have a maintenance person on staff or something like that. But if you're scattered site and you got to run around town, you got people moving in, people moving out, and you got 5 of them call you on the same day with problems, and you got to figure out how to be in all 5 places at one time. It's a nightmare. How do you do that, right? You have to have people on call constantly. Well, if they're busy doing other things, somebody's got to do something. So with asset management, you're doing something completely different. You're not working 30 to 40 hours. You didn't invest in a job. You invested in something to create passive income. And that's what asset management is. Huge transition when you get this. When you get this concept and you start to transition over, it's amazing, because with asset management, now you're working on your business. You're hiring property managers. There's no way, I haven't even been to my Atlanta property yet. We've owned it since, we closed on that at the beginning of November. I haven't been there yet. Now, a bunch of my partners have been down there. They've walked it, and I trust my partners, and that's awesome. My Dallas property, I've been out to, and I've walked that property. I spent like 2 hours on the property, walked around, took a bunch of pictures. I sat by the pool and did a really cool video, and I shared with my other partners what I was doing and how cool it was, and I met the people in the office, and I got in my car, and I went and grabbed a coffee. And the whole time I was there, the ladies running around with the plumbers, they're dealing with sewage, and I never got involved in it. It was really cool. You know, you don't have to do that stuff as an asset manager. You buy the property, you invest in the property, but as an asset manager, you're doing more investor relations. You're structuring deals, you're finding deals, you're putting them together. And once you find that deal and you get to the point where you're now managing the asset, I spend 3 to 5 hours a week max on 2 properties that are in, several states apart. And I do a couple hours of meetings. I do a couple of hours of tasks that I need to run, and then I'm off working on my other businesses. And we do this division of labor within our team, so we're all kind of taking on different tasks. We've got property managers, and they're third-party property managers that take care of the day-to-day in and out, leasing the apartments, marketing the apartments, making sure that we're priced according to the market. All of those things happen. They take the maintenance calls. We get a maintenance report every week. These are the units that went down. Here's what we're doing about it. This is when they'll be back up. We're like, okay, anything else? Okay, cool, thanks. And are you following our business plan? Are you tracking what we ask to do? These are the units that we want to renovate. How are they coming along? Send us pictures, send us videos, show us what's going on. I'll be down there in a few weeks. We'll walk them. You can show me a couple of the units. That'll be great. So you don't have to be as actively involved with asset management, and that's really cool. So I told a couple of you guys I'll share something that we're working on right now on our Dallas property. We're looking at water conservation as a way to add some value. So let me back up just a second. Under asset management, you're looking at two different growth opportunities. You either have a value proposition or you have a growth proposition. Whatever it is that you want to do with that property. So in a growth model, in your thought process and how you're filtering every decision that you make, your growth means that it's going to be a slow and steady kind of smooth, wealthy build. The property is probably stabilized. It probably doesn't have a lot of deferred maintenance. It's in really good shape. It's maybe an A or a B class property. And it's just the rents are a little bit low. So you're going to raise some rents, and it's just going to be more of a management process, not a real heavy lift that you're working with. And so you just got this long-term steady growth proposition. You want to hold on to this property for 10 plus years. So that's growth, right? Well, the value proposition it's fast, it's calculated. And this is where you get flow valuized, right? So it's how value add, you guys have heard of the value add, right? So a lot of us say, well, for value add, I want to paint the building, I'm going to remodel all the units, we're going to raise the rents, we're going to do things like this. So I'll give you an example of what we're doing in Dallas. That was a 6,000% ROI in the first year for a $500 investment. And it's gonna realize about $30,000 in profit over the first year. Now here's what's really cool. When you understand that on a 6 cap, if your property is valued at a 6 cap, $1 of increase in revenue equals $16 in value. So take $30,000 and do the math on that for a $500 investment. All day long, I would do that. All day long, and it'll take about a week to do, and somebody else is doing it, right? So we had the water conservation team come in to do this conservation, and they're going to put in low flow toilets. They're going to put in low flow shower heads and things like that, so that we can reduce the consumption of water on that property, because water is expensive. It's a high cost item, and as the owner, we get billed for that. In Texas, we're only allowed to bill back it's like 80% of the 75 or 80% of the total bill we can bill back to the residents. The rest of it falls on us as owners. That's our expense. So when you're looking at a value add scenario, you're looking at increasing revenues and decreasing expenses, because that's what ultimately drives your net operating income. And that net operating income drives the value of the property. So every decision you're making about how you deploy your capital in those buildings and in your business is based on either growth or value, right? So we look at the conservation or the water conservation plan. It's going to cost us about 90 grand. and we'll realize about somewhere around 130,000 a year in water savings. When we do this one sub meter to the irrigation line that waters all of the landscaping, because there's no meter on it right now, that gets lumped in with all the other apartments, and we can only bill back so much of it. And the way that the calculation is, the city calculates out whatever percentage for irrigation, and we can't bill the residents for that. So by putting a meter on it, this $500 meter, so that we can track how much water is going in and out of that, we can now bill back and recapture a lot of our bill back to the customer, or to the unit owners, and increase the amount of RUBS, their utility billing, which is just a really simple thing, right? The city of Allen and the water department are going to come out and install it. We just have to buy the thing. No time involved, and $500, right? I mean, it was like a 6,000% ROI on that investment. So we're making decisions based on what value is this going to turn into. And so some things you might look at and say, oh, that sounds like a really cool idea. But when you sit down and you start to factor, what's our ROI on that? How much capital do we have to outlay on that? Then you start to filter through and making decisions how you want to drive the profitability of that asset. And that's what an asset manager does. You're trying to drive the profitability of your portfolio, because ultimately in the syndication world, we have investors that we have to answer to, and we have to get a return on their capital, right? So they've invested and they trust us to give them a return. They give us their money and they want to see that return. It's kind of important to them. You said you're going to get us a 9% return. Where is it? We got to answer that question, right? Our value proposition is we want to stay alive. We don't want our kneecaps broken, right? So that's kind of ultimately, from in a really, really, really high level, that's what you're getting into when you talk about asset management versus property management. And I think when we're starting out and we're young in the investment space, it's really easy to buy single family, to buy small multifamily properties. And because there aren't very many of them and they're local, it's easy for us to jump in and do the management ourselves. So we become the property manager. We create a job for ourselves. We start getting overwhelmed. We start neglecting tenants. We start neglecting our families because we have to get this stuff done. And, sometimes we can run into capital problems, whatever, because rather than going and finding more deals, we're overchanging out a toilet or we're painting walls. Our best use of time is finding more deals and increasing the revenue. But we get caught up in this idea of, I can manage it myself because it's only a few. And that's where we get caught sometimes. Nothing wrong with it. We just have to recognize what it is, because if we really truly are getting into the game of real estate investing for passive income, you got to know how to do that. You got to know how to make it truly passive. Otherwise, it's not passive at all. I mean, it is very, very active. And talk to Eduardo afterwards. He owns 34 units here in town that he manages himself. And he has a smile on his face. He loves it. And that's awesome. You just have to know your business model. You've got to know what your business model is and what you're trying to accomplish with your portfolio, because it's really hard to scale something that you have to be on site every day. It's really hard to scale it because our time is something that we can't scale unless you learn how to get those systems in place. That make sense?
Yeah.
It's good? Okay. So that's asset management. So what's next? Follow us. Follow us on Facebook, right? We are working on our classes. So as we get our classes uploaded, we're going to be posting those we'll be posting those classes and whatnot on Facebook so that you'll be able to see those. We'll have some classes that are free. Some will have, there'll be a little bit of a charge for it depending on how much depth we're going into. So you can check that out. Invite your friends, bring them around. We're going to be teaching we're teaching on the flow. All right. So the flow is about getting into the essence of cash flow and building, but also getting into your essence about what you're passionate about. And so there's going to be the next one: foundation, leverage, and opportunities. When we lay the foundation and you set your mindset on what it is that you're going to do, and you start to get the framework for how a lot of these different principles work. We'll talk about real estate investing. We'll talk about syndication. We're gonna do a lot of interviews, and we're gonna bring in people who are experts in oil and gas. We're gonna bring in experts in, people do ATMs, people do car washes, people do self-storage. There's a lot of asset classes that you can invest in, and you can be an asset manager in more than just real estate. I don't do gold and silver. I have some, but I'm not like this expert in gold and silver, but I know people who are. So we'll probably do some interviews with some people like that so that they can share their knowledge and share their expertise in those areas. And some of those interviews will probably end up making it into some of our courses, and things like that. It's a great question. So the question was, for anybody that's watching, the question was, what are we going to be teaching? But it's all about laying that foundation first and then learning how to leverage whatever assets you have, because once you learn how to leverage your assets, those opportunities are going to present themselves. And that's really it. Our first class that's coming up that we're working on right now is called Everything You Learned About Money is a Lie. That's a fun class, and you probably got some ideas in your head already, but I'm not going to tell you. You'll have to come check it out. That'll be fun. But ultimately, guys, that's really that's a presentation. That's asset management. So I do want to open it up for any questions that you guys have. Anything that I didn't cover, because this is like such a high level. There's so many different directions that you can go with asset management. But does anybody have any questions? Shane?
Choose which partners you decide to partner up with.
It's a great question. So question was, how do you choose the partners that you decide to partner with? Anytime you're looking at partners, it's like dating.
That's it.
I know. So it does suck. It does suck. You're gonna get into relationships, and you might like each other and everything, but you start to realize that this isn't really a very good business relationship, and you don't want to be involved in that. So sometimes you can set yourself up in some situations that you don't necessarily want to be into. And if you set up a full-on partnership with somebody and you go through and you set up LLCs, and you find out quickly after you've set up those LLCs that you don't like the people that you're in business with, guess what? You're married to them and they have equity in your business. Try to get rid of them and see what kind of nightmare that's going to create. So there's a lot of different strategies you can get involved in to make sure that you protect your equity in your companies. There's dating processes that you can go through to, you start to find out what's the criteria. You don't necessarily want people on your team that are exactly like you. If they're exactly like you, you're probably never going to get anything done. You want people that have different skill sets. So you've got to identify where your strengths are, figure out where the strengths are of your partners, so that everybody brings something equally to the table. And sometimes it's not going to be completely equal. You might have somebody that's a little bit lopsided or whatever, but that's okay if their willingness is there to learn. If their willingness is there to show up and be part of it, and you guys are able to have adult conversations without like blowing each other up on social media, like, I can't believe this jerk, and doing stuff like that. If you're in that situation, it's a bad partnership. Does that answer your question?
Great start.
It's a great start. Yeah, that's a loaded question. That's a loaded. That's heavy. Yeah, the criteria is a big part.
Bring different pieces to the puzzle. Partners, and she's a CFO of a big healthcare company here in town. And, like, she's all about the finding the renters, doing the leases, but she has no idea about the negotiation, finding the deals, all of those things. So that's a really great point.
Yeah. So if you can find somebody that's, yeah,
that's like perfect.
Yeah, if you're the front guy and you love talking about, or gal, you love talking to the people and putting the deals together, structure the deal and then hand it off, and let that person manage all the assets and let them do the asset management. So like on our team, we actually have a dedicated team that their primary role is the asset management after the fact. And they're doing a lot of the administrative things. We've got part of our team who is like, dude, we go out and we build relationships with all these brokers, and we're out trying to find deals, and we're trying to put these deals together. We got a couple other guys on the team that they're kind of like, I don't like talking to people, but by golly, I love numbers. So let me sit in front of a spreadsheet all day long. And they talk to the banks and they structure the deals and they put that stuff together. So you just figure out where your strengths are. And sometimes when you're getting started, you may not always know, and you just kind of have to fall into those spots. But it's really, really important before you start legally binding yourself to each other that you have a dating process that you're working your way through, because if it's just, it can get ugly pretty fast. So that's a great question. What else?
So I'm reading the Multifamily Millionaire right now, and what they're talking about is finding, like you just said, finding ways to.
So the one by Keller?
It's one of the Bigger Pockets books.
Bigger Pockets. Okay. Yeah.
But they're talking about, like you said, lowering expenses and hiring the income. So for one of the things you just talked about, you found you could do a sub-meter on the irrigation system.
Mhm.
How can you tell overall if a property can be sub-metered or not? Because I know you could also do that for units as well.
You've got to, every city's got different regulations. Every city and every state has different rules. So you kind of have to, you got to check with the local utility companies, and the utility companies are going to be able to help you with that.
Okay.
So just whatever market you're in, just reach out to the utility company, and they'll walk you through that process. And if they don't know the answer, they might know who to send you to.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a hunt and peck game. You just start making some calls until you find the right people that you need to talk to. So.
Okay, so pretty much just contact the utility company for whatever city or state.
Yeah. Did everybody hear the question? He was asking about when we're doing like sub-metering, or we're looking at the utilities and trying to figure that stuff out. How do you know? Who do you need to talk to? And how do you know whether or not you're going to be able to sub-meter those properties, or you're not going to be able to sub-meter those properties? So basically just reach out to the utility company, and they'll kind of direct you in the right direction. So it's a great question. Yep.
How did you find the guys that you ended up partnering with on either one of those deals, the bigger, 200 unit deals? Did you know them already? Did they contact you? How did that kind of work out?
So I have, okay, so any of you guys that know me, how many networking events do you see me going out to? I am not a big networker. I mean, I'm not like, that is not my strength, which is really weird, because being in the space that I work in on a daily basis, I need to be, but it's just not where I just don't do it. I don't like to, I get really weird. I get weird insecurities, and I get all kinds of, I just get weird, and I go into really strange places. So my partner, Ben, is the guy that walks in the room, and Ben lives in Hawaii. And Ben is a guy that he walks in the room. He's a surfer. He's like, mahalo, what's up? And everybody in the room loves this guy. I mean, he walks in and everybody gravitates to him. And so he like schmoozes everybody. And I mean, he is like this networking guy, and he meets everybody in the world. So he actually discovered both of those deals. And my partner, Tim, in Phoenix, same thing. He's really good at networking, just great guy, loves meeting people, loves talking to people. And so Tim got us connected with our team in Atlanta. And then Ben got us connected with our team in Dallas. So it's actually two separate teams that we're working with. And, and everybody on the team is great. And there's people on the team that I kind of gravitate towards, because I'll start geeking out with them over like goofy little things, and we start analyzing the stuff and getting kind of crazy. And then there's other guys on the team that are like, yeah, whatever. They'll take me or leave me, because I just kind of, I don't know, I just rub that way, and that's fine. That's fine. You just have to. That's where your strengths of your team are really important. And so I love the way that Ben and I are able to complement each other, because people start asking him about the deal, and he's like, let me get my partner Josh on the phone. Let's talk about this. Because he starts getting stressed out when they start throwing numbers at him, and his head starts spinning off his shoulders, and he gets. I love him. He's awesome. So we just know that about each other, and he and I met through we were part of a mastermind coaching program together, and we met through that group, and eventually over time we dated for a while, and eventually said, you know what, let's do this. So great question, Eduardo.
You said it's only for accredited investors?
For sometimes yes, sometimes no. So when you're doing syndications, you got two different types. You've got some for non-accredited investors, and you have some that are fully accredited. And when you set up your syndication and you go and you talk to the SEC attorneys, the SEC attorneys are going to ask you, do you want this to be accredited, for accredited investors only, because it's a different regulation with it. It's regulation D 506C is for accredited investors only. And there's a whole process that the accredited investors have to go through. When you're doing a 506B, there's all kinds of regulations around that, but that's all part of your initial filing when you set everything up with the attorneys and before you present the deal to investors. That stuff has to be filed with the SEC first, and so.
And that's part of the also
For the asset management,
right?
The asset management?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the asset management it's kind of it's an interesting dynamic because asset management happens after the acquisition, after you own the property. The acquisition process is where you're setting up your SEC, where you're getting all your investors. So that's during the acquisition phase. It's early on after you get a contract on it. When somebody has accepted your letter of intent, then you're gonna like reach out to your attorney immediately, send them over that letter of intent, and the attorney is going to start the negotiation process with their attorneys. They're going to start filing the SEC stuff. You may not even have an exercised, fully executed contract yet, but you're already starting that process. But you want to have a pretty good idea going into it because those billable hours add up fast, and they're not cheap. You know, it's the price of a small car. So, so you really want to make sure that you kind of have a pretty good idea of what you're doing going into it, or you'll waste a lot of money. So, good question. Good question. Anybody else? Awesome. And are we done? Is that it?
What about
I have more,
1031
but
exchange? Is that it?
1031 exchange? That is a loaded question, my friend. And that is a whole class in and of itself.
I know.
And yeah, 1031
Well,
exchange.
probably somebody.
Yeah, we got time.
And then you say that's it, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, 1031 exchange, that's a big question. It's a big CPA question, and it's because I'm not a CPA, I'm not going to answer that question right here. So definitely, if you're getting into 1031 exchange on this type of process, you really have to talk to your attorney, and you really have to talk to your because the structure changes dramatically in how you're bringing investors in that have a 1031. They can't go into the same pool of money with the other investors. It's a completely different animal. So, great question. All right, awesome guys, thank you.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Was that the whole thing? I did have another question.
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it. Go for it.
So when you're looking, right now we're looking for out of state properties.
Mhm.
So whenever you do get someone, let's say I call you up, you're like, yeah, I do want to sell whatever. How do I do the inspection on that? So from what I've heard, some people send a contractor and they just help them take pictures. Some people have a property management company. If you're in a state where your partners aren't, nobody's there, I simply just contacted someone they want to sell. How do you get eyes on the property? Do you recommend flying over there every time? Do you recommend what would you do?
When it's time for inspections, I want to be on site.
Okay.
I want to see those properties. You know, you better have like really solid trust in your partners. If you're going to let them do all the work,
Okay.
or not necessarily do all the work, but if they're going to walk the property, because if you're putting this thing together, if it's just, let me back up. Are you doing a syndication, or are you doing, is it just
us.
just you guys
Yeah,
partnering?
2 or 3 people, yeah.
Okay, so you're not dealing with, if you're just doing like a JV in that situation, then you don't have relationships in that town. There are a lot of really amazing contractors. Is anybody a contractor in the room? I love contractors. They're so wonderful. And there are also some bad ones.
Yeah.
And when you don't know, and when they aren't necessarily involved, your broker by license can't go in there and act like your contractor. They're not going to point stuff out to you.
Right.
The contractors and the inspectors, you have no idea if they're good, if they're bad, whatever. And at the end of the day, if you're going to be managing this asset from a distance, you better know what you're buying. You absolutely better know what you're buying. So I would make sure that your contract is written in such a way that you have an out.
Okay.
And just be there for the inspections.
Okay.
I mean, that's I would want to be.
Okay, so pretty much look at the numbers. If it works out, get it under contract, and then be there for the inspections with the
Are you working with a seller directly?
most likely that right now. I mean, we're barely 4 weeks into looking for multifamily.
Okay.
So,
But are you going direct to seller?
Yeah, I'm
You're not,
calling sellers up all day
okay.
long.
So you're not finding stuff on the MLS, you're going to sellers.
Well, I'm going to, but for right now, it's all myself marketing directly to sellers.
Okay, so your sellers in these situations, they want to sell the property. There's a reason why they're selling the property. And there's probably going to be a lot of things that they're not going to disclose to you.
Okay.
So I would absolutely 100%, I want to be on site.
Okay.
100%. 100%. Yep. Cover your assets. That's a great question. Yeah. So you just have to build that into your budget and make
Yeah.
sure, whatever your travel expenses are.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Ed.
All right.